to continue with the session. I thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And good morning, everyone. Perhaps good afternoon also, because I'm aware that the program is joined by persons who are outside of Nigeria. AFICTA is actually an Africa ICT Alliance. The membership is across Africa. There are national members also who are on the call today. I'm happy to welcome you all to the Policy Advocacy Series, beginning with the first edition. And AFICTA really is an organization, not for profit, really, non-governmental, focused on giving a voice, as it were, to ICT businesses across Africa. Its mission is to help fulfill the promise of the digital age for everyone in Africa. It does so by encouraging multi-stakeholder dialogues to accelerate development, ICT development in Africa. So it's my pleasure today to be the moderator, and my name is Inyeke Mabonta. I happen to be the Nigeria coordinator for AFICTA. And welcome to all the panelists. I'm happy you're all able to join. We have two distinguished gentlemen and a lady. The three of them are very well known in Nigeria in the innovation ecosystem and actually also in the software sector. Not to forget the private equity ecosystem where Folabi incidentally is an icon. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome, and I hope you can all hear me. I am speaking to everyone, both the panelists and to those on the call. I hope I'm audible to everyone. Will somebody please indicate if he's able to hear me? Philip Osong, can you hear me? Raise your hand, let me know. Oh, great, thank you. So everyone, apologize for the 6 minutes or thereabouts late start. We'll go into the program right away. And the chair had also given some opening remarks, and thank you, Chair, for that. And he's speaking from his wealth of experience as a AFICTA chair in Africa. We are going to have the Vice Chair for West Africa also make comments, but I don't think he's been able to make it right now. But when he does join, I hope he will intervene at some point. So I also wanted to get the Executive Secretary for the Africa ICT Foundation, Emmanuel Bassi, to make some remarks because they are collaborating with AFICTA on this project. But he's not yet on the call, but we have to proceed. So we will go straight into the presentations. And before then, I'd like to have some introductions of our panelists. I have asked them not to be modest regarding their introductions. I want to give them a chance, 2 minutes each of them, to speak to us and let us know who they are, what they do, and why they're interested in the program. I would ask Nneka to go first, followed by Pius, and then Folabi.
Good morning, everyone.
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, good morning. My name is Nneka Uke. I work with the Innovation Support Network. We're Nigeria's largest community of innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship hubs with over 120 members across within our community across Nigeria. We support entrepreneurs, run programmatic. The hubs support entrepreneurs by running programmatic as well as delivering infrastructural support, peer mentorship, as well as linkages to funders, and in some cases providing funding themselves. Innovation Support Network as an organization is not just a community, but we also act as an advocacy group on behalf of the innovation and technology ecosystem, driving conversations around policy, being involved in policy in certain cases. We're very actively participatory in galvanizing the ecosystem around the Nigeria Startup Bill. And we also create linkages with funders, public sector, academia, and private sector to make hubs a more viable, visible, and strategic contribution to the innovation ecosystem. We believe that hubs are critical to solving the youth unemployment and engagement problem in Nigeria. And we're driving the conversations around programs to involve more hubs in solving these issues, as well as other strategic engagements. Startups, by their very nature, especially tech and innovation-based startups, have a lot of IP considerations that should be made in their product development and go-to-market strategy. And that's why I'm part of this conversation, and I'm quite keen to be part of this engagement today, especially with the gentlemen on the panel, the well-versed gentlemen on the panel. Thank you so much for having me in.
Excellent. Thank you, Nneka. So would Pius take the next 2 minutes?
Certainly. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you all can hear me. My name is Pius Okibo Jr. I'm the CEO of Infosoft Nigeria Limited. We're a software services organization. We've done a lot of software development in the 31 years we've been in existence in Nigeria. And we're also a process improvement organization as well. As it stands at the moment, the chairman of the Nigerian Content Consultative Forum on ICT. It's a sectorial working group under the Nigerian Content Monitoring and Development Board. Beyond that, I just finished being the chairperson of the Python community for Nigeria, a community of over 5,000 Python developers. Before that, I was the president. At some point, I was the president and vice president of the Institute of Software Practitioners of Nigeria. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that my entire life, everything about me is software. So I am very, very pleased and glad to be here. I'd like to share a lot of my personal experiences. Personal, I mean, as per Infosoft Nigeria. Share some of my experience as it applies to intellectual property and the like. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to introduce myself, according to Inye, to sell ourselves. So I've just done that. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful. Both of you have done extremely well. Let's put Folabi on the spot. Let's see how well he will. The two men are grizzled.
Yes, like I always say, these white hairs were earned. Were not. So good morning, everyone. Thank you, Inye, for inviting, and thank you, Chair, for putting all of this together. It's really a pleasure to be here to talk about this very important topic, and I am pleased to be part of this distinguished panel. Very hard to be speaking after Nneka and Pius, but I will try to fulfill what Inye has said. I think the little twist I'll put on is that I have a very, very background which spans entrepreneurship in the software and information technology sector, goes into investing in that sector, consulting for the sector, being a director of a hub, and actually running my own, so many things. So I'll just give a bit of a background. Currently, I'm the managing partner of a private equity firm called Levo Capital. We were the first Pan-African or sub-Saharan African PE firm to invest in technology-enabled business across Africa, and our portfolio of companies includes notable companies like Interswitch, Pagatech, a company called Greystone, Rancard, and Solo Intelligraph. And of course, those are the investments we made out of our fund, but we also made lots of investments in our private capacities and smaller companies all across Africa. So we can get into that later. Now, before that, My experience runs through being the first employee and the main director of SAP in Nigeria. SAP is a very large global ERP company, and so in that vein, I established SAP in West Africa. I ran it for about 5 years before going on to, I guess it was to go back and deepen my knowledge of information technology and actually study innovation management and technology policy at the University of London. And that gave me a new language with which to observe and participate in this space. I've also, in the last 1 year, also because of the COVID crisis, gotten involved in a project, a global project, kicked off by NASA, the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Caltech. They created a device, a medical device, a ventilator, and they asked organizations to bid for the technology licenses to implement those technologies locally. And my team won a license. We're the only ones in Sub-Saharan Africa to get a license to try and exploit this technology for the benefits of Africans in Africa. And of course, that involved taking on IPRs that were generated in the United States and trying to use them in our local context, whilst adding our own IPRs to that portfolio in order to roll out the device and so on and so forth. So without further ado, I'll just stop there and say that, of course, it's a pleasure. Like Pius, there's a lot of things we can talk about. And so, Inye, over to you to keep us sane and on the narrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Folabi, and thank you, gentlemen and lady, for the excellent introductions of yourselves. Anyone who's been in Nigeria for any period up to 10 years would know Pius, would know Folabi, and would certainly know Nneka from the work you do and from the interventions you've made over time. But I would pause for a while. I saw that the Vice Chair, West Africa for AFICTA, is on the call now. He joined us a moment ago. Tola, would you want to say a few words? We had you on the program anyway, so if you can hear me, turn on your microphone and speak to the panelists and to the audience, the attendees.
Can I speak a minute later, please? Just in the middle of something, please.
Oh, okay. When you're ready, just let us know. Thank you. Okay, so we will go to the presentations, really, but I just want to say, although it's a webinar, we will allow for anyone who is an attendee and would like to speak directly, just show by raising your hand. I would acknowledge you, recognize you, and have you also speak when it's time for general interactions. But you might want to use the chat button to also put in your questions to the panelists when you listen to them. So we're not going to be very rigid. We'll allow for interactions. You might not see everyone, but you can speak to everyone when you do want to. So we will do this in two parts. First will be the presentations by the panelists, just to get an icing, or well, a preview of the discussions, really, and have them take 10 minutes each to organize their thoughts. If they want to use slides, you're welcome to. Otherwise, you can speak from your notes. You have 10 minutes each, and then we'll move to the panel session. Nneka will take the first slot, as I informed her already. You have 10 minutes, and remember, we're focusing on IP creation and IP retention in Nigeria. Although AFICTA is all of Africa, but we're focusing, for this first edition of the Policy Advocacy Series, we're focusing on Nigeria. So Nneka, if you're ready now, we'll be glad to hear you.
Good morning. I was going to do age before beauty and allow Mr. Pius to go first.
Nneka, in my culture, we always accept ladies first. So please be our guest and take the lead.
I'm sure we share the same culture, sir, and I'm not aware of that.
I have a rule. I will take the lady first.
Exactly.
I've been railroaded. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much again, AFICTA, as an organization, the board and members, as well as my co-panelists. Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be in such esteemed company. As I mentioned earlier, I currently serve as the Executive Secretary at Innovation Support Network, where we're helping to drive the Nigerian innovation ecosystem. For us, innovation is not just technology, it's finding new ways and supporting new ways to do to drive effectiveness in entrepreneurship and daily life. And when people are innovating, it's important to protect that innovation. And that's where IP protection comes in. I won't speak too much on the retention side, at least not at this time. I'll speak more about the creation and why it's so important. Because IP is not, intellectual property is not physically tangible in certain cases, i.e., where it is not industrial design, it's not a physical item. There's a lot of opportunity for theft. Also, we live in a highly globalized world. Something that a lot of entrepreneurs, we find that a lot of entrepreneurs do not know, and I only know this because I found out in the course of work, right? So I'm not surprised that people don't know unless you have a degree in law, is that when you register your IP locally, it doesn't cover internationally. So where do we now start the enlightenment on IP creation, IP protection? And how do we make sure that it is seamless? How do we drive that, adoption of owning, creating, protecting, and then retaining IP within Nigeria? Especially as we see it as being an extension of the entrepreneurial, the outcomes of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. When we count outcomes to be able to say these are the results coming out of Nigeria's entrepreneurship ecosystem, tech or otherwise, one of the things we should be counting are the number of IPs that have been granted, not just applied for, but granted, and then the number of trademarks and all of that. We see, obviously, the numbers are always higher for trademarks than for IP because IP is a little more complicated. Trademark can just be a name. But what we do need to see is how, and I'd like for that to be one of the outcomes of this conversation, is how we can drive more adoption of ownership of ideas through the incorporation and registration of intellectual property. And then when we see that as a body of not just knowledge or work, but also a resource, then maybe we will start as individuals, business owners, ecosystem enablers, and government, start dealing with IP slightly differently. There was a comparison that I wanted to do around IP filings versus ease of doing business. Unfortunately, and I had been told this by my team, and I had been told this by an IP lawyer that we often work with, that the statistics on IP are not very easy to find. Very interestingly, Nigeria had some of the highest numbers on the continent versus places like Rwanda, Kenya, and South Africa. But when you compare that to ease of doing business, it doesn't add up. So it's probably, again, an issue of data collection and data presentation. And I'm speaking to data collected from the WIPO website. But if we're even specifically, which is the global IP organization, but if we're even speaking specifically to ease of doing business, and I speak to ease of doing business because for me, and I think I skipped some of my thoughts. For me, growing the adoption of awareness around IP retention, IP registration, IP ownership, and IP retention is all part of, again, growing the entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem in Nigeria. if we know that IP is an intangible asset of businesses that is highly valuable. Mr. Eson is an investor, and I think Mr. Akubo as well. And one of the things that we've seen and that we know is that businesses that have registered IP or that even have applied for IP registration have higher valuation because it shows that the business has something that is tangible and is part of their comparative analysis, comparative advantage. So we need to start driving that consciousness around IP. And I'll speak to it a little later, but I'll just close with this. For us to do that, among several other things, I think one of the critical things that we need to do from the public sector side is start seeing our innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem, not just as a revenue earner, but actually a fulcrum that can drive youth engagement, drive economic development, and drive better societal development within our spaces on a micro and even a macro level. Because if we are very strategic as a country towards building businesses, building innovation, creating things, and not just using. Because right now we have a lot of people that are users. If we are developing a culture of innovation and creation, then we will have to also, by extension, protect the things that we are creating. And if we're protecting it, then we will see more IP adoption, more registration of IP, and more consciousness also around the protection of IP. So this is a very broad conversation, and we did start the conversation, and it's very interesting, and I don't want to get into someone else's section. So I'm just going to stop for now and probably say some more when we all are engaging. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent, Nekat. Thank you for the hint on the IP creation, really, from the point of view of it being a practice that a nation would have. I like the fact that you hinted at being creators and not just users, right? That's interesting. But here is a challenge I'd like you to think about by the time we get to the panel session. Now, you also mentioned, by the way, about IP registration. So we all know that before you even register it, you have created it. So we'd like to hear more about anything our government can do to enable more of the creation you talked about, even before the registration, which is also critical. But we do have to create first before we then register, and then we retain globally, for instance. So but thank you anyway for the short presentation, giving us an insight, a full view, as it were, to what's coming. So let's hear Pius, another 10 minutes. Pius, you've been in the thick of all of this, so let's see how it's panned out for you as the CEO of Infosoft.
Thank you very much. Once again, I'd like to extend my appreciation for having us come and speak at this webinar. In the course of my conversation here, I'm going to refer to some of our personal experiences. When I say personal, I'm referring to Infosoft, some of the experiences that we've had in dealing with intellectual property related issues, both from a creation standpoint and some of the challenges that we've encountered through the years. I'm going to start off with a legal issue. A couple of years ago, we discovered that some young firm had lifted our source code, repackaged the face, and started reselling his stuff under a new name, a new label, to the same customers that I had. And by the time we now instituted a lawsuit, we found out that the legal process, as much as we wanted to bring him to book, it's taken such a long time. We're actually in our 10th year in court with this software firm. In the process, the young man has packed his bags and moved to Canada. We're still in court with a new judge. And we're still going through the same cycle of every time a new judge comes into play, a whole new set of beginnings start all over. So that's one issue that we need to address as far as intellectual property litigation is concerned. We have to find a way to reduce the amount of time it takes to litigate an IP issue. Now, whether we do it through the industrial court or whether we do it through the federal court system, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. Inya, you'll be in a better position to establish which court of law we should use for litigating such IP-related issues. It can be very disheartening if you spend 10 years pursuing an IP litigation issue. Okay, now that's on that part. We have another issue. This administration came up with the Executive Order 5. That Executive Order 5 states very clearly, if there's a ministry, a department, or a government agency that is already using a Nigerian IP-based software solution, you cannot throw that solution out of that organization because you want to go and buy an enterprise resource planning system like an SAP, an Oracle, a Microsoft, or a Sage. Well, we have some experience where an agency bought Sage, and over the past 5 years, they've been trying to figure out a way to get our own HR and payroll system out of that organization by redeveloping, well, modifying their own HR and payroll system. One issue that kept propping up and we kept emphasizing, I kept saying to them, there is no country that shares the exact same HR policies or payroll policies. No two countries saying the exact same thing. So the amount of money that agency would have to spend to make all those modifications can take one heck of a long time. I have seen it happen across so many agencies, so many government ministries and departments. Nigeria's payroll and HR policies are different from the way it is in Tajikistan, South Africa, United States, Canada, and even England. We're not the same thing with England, believe it or not. Now, the issue here is the client started off by saying, well, we are a profit-driven organization, so we have to find a solution that best fits our organization. So my argument was, tell me how a foreign HR software best fits your organization as opposed to a locally developed software designed from the ground up to fit exactly what it is that you do. So that argument, we are now being protected by the Executive Order 5. So they cannot now throw us out. So what we're now saying is the ERP companies cannot come to Nigeria and insist that all their own modules are tightly integrated. They should be given, Nigerian companies must be given an opportunity to integrate their own IPs into their own solutions. That way, everybody is happy and we can all sleep easy at night. So that's a second example of IP-related issues being brought into the mainstream of such organizations to allow them do the things that they can do best. Unfortunately, when we started, you could not easily go to a government agency or government authority to register your IP. The best we could do was to register a trademark. That was the best we could do at the time through Nigerian Copyright Commission. But I do hear now that the Nigerian Copyright Commission, they've now incorporated IT registration. I haven't confirmed that, but I would like to know at this point if that's the case. Now, the third example I wanted to give was recently a software firm put together a brilliant solution that would actually make waves from an African point of view. So they reached out to the federal government. The federal government was waxing lyrical about, supporting his solution, his software, and all of that. Now, what then now happened was, in all that fanfare and all that excitement, nothing really happened. So he's sitting at home and he gets a phone call from Rwanda. The Rwandan authorities said to him, please hop onto a plane, but at their own expense. He flew to Rwanda, sat down with them, and before he knew what was happening, they threw $250,000 in his face. Of course, as a young company that needed to get going, he took that. And he took that on the promise that they were going to also make available to him $10 million. So the question was, who then now owns the IP after he's been given an injection of funds of $10 million? Would that IP belong to him, or would that IP now belong to the Rwandese? These are some of the questions that one would need to address. In his case, and in fairness to me, I said to him, go get yourself a good IP lawyer to help advise you on the best approach for accepting $10 million for your intellectual property. If you choose to now let go through some share arrangement or ownership arrangement within the business, that's entirely your choice. Then you can give up part of your business that owns that IP. So in some of those cases, like in this third case, you find that the Nigerian government should have made that extra move to encourage this young chap to allow that IP to be retained within the country, and then help him now go through the process of doing all the necessary registrations. And because Inya, you just made a statement here that you were more concerned with the challenges of IP creation, which will then now help the federal government do what they need to do. They need to do the needful. And I'm happy that Falabi is here with us as well, because he can now take it to the next level. Basically, what then can we now put in place, either from a private sector point of view or from a government standpoint? From my own position, the government should have some sort of a slush fund that they can use to now provide some sort of funding assistance for those seeking IP registration. Like if you wanted to go and do a patent on your software, somebody needs to help, some group, some agency, some department somewhere should be able to bring together the professionals that can sit down with that company and educate them on how to go about the process of registering their IP. I think I'll stop at this point. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Pius, thank you very much for throwing up those issues. You're handing over the baton to Falabi. But let me highlight something. It is good to talk about the legal issues surrounding IP, right? And its ownership. Excellent. So we'll be looking, not at this session, at the copyright laws. But for this session, I will direct discussion a bit more closely to the IP retention from the point of view of what we want our government to do, which brings me to your last example of the young software company that is giving $10 million by Rwanda. So where does the IP, who owns the IP? Is it this young man, the Nigerian, or is it the Rwanda government, for instance, or the Rwanda people? So that's key to the issue. Do we expect that our country would have picked up the gauntlet and done something to say, hey, you have a fantastic solution, we'll protect your IP, and we can help develop the system that will protect other such IPs in the future, so that the unicorns that will emerge out of Nigeria should really be Nigerian and not what Falabi and I call Nigerian company, foreign capital. All right, Falabi, you remember that expression? You use it sometime in Lagos. That's what will probably emerge in the next few years. Companies that are Nigerian by registration, but now have all their funding foreign. So where is the IP in all of that? So Falabi, you would have the microphone now. Take your 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Inye. And thank you, Neka and Pius, for actually throwing up a couple of facets of this very interesting conversation. I will start looking at it from the point of view of an investor and also a practitioner. And I might take a bit of a contrarian view on some of the things we've already discussed. Of course, I mentioned that I was SAP's first employee, so maybe I've already been, how shall I say, tainted by drinking their Kool-Aid. So Pius, we'll have to talk a bit about the ERP and EO5 and so on and so forth. I'm sure we'll get into that. But the first thing I'd like to say is that in our business, we like to say that ideas are worthless and execution is everything. So we when you go to a VC or PE company, typically you say, here's my idea, sign an NDA. Typically the VC will say, no, I don't see any need for me to do that because ideas are, a dime a dozen. But show me what you've done and show me how you're going to get this idea to a point of product market fit, scaling, profitability, and so on and so forth. So it's very important that we keep in mind that view. Just keep it somewhere. And then I'm going to talk about, I'm going to lay out my own comments under 5 headings, and I'll just go through them one by one. The first one is that in my understanding and experience, just following on that, diffusion is greater than invention. The world is littered with a lot of inventions and patents that actually have not led to any tangible value. And for a country at this stage of development, we really need to find a way to leapfrog and go much faster to create jobs, opportunities, wealth, and all these things for our people. So one of the things that we look at generally is to say that we learn how to innovate in doing. So learning by doing, creating by doing. There's radical innovation, and of course, there's incremental innovation. The radical innovation is what we talk about that happens a lot in laboratories, in universities, and so on and so forth. But the incremental innovation is what happens when you are doing something, and as Pius said, there's a process improvement. When you're doing it, you find all the little things that don't make it work, and you improve on those things. And in so doing, you create a kind of tacit IP, tacit knowledge that is actually much harder to replicate than the explicit knowledge that you might codify in a system, a process, or so on. It's that we know how to do things. We have learned a way to do it that works much better than anyone else. And this happens a lot, for example, in Japan, and that's how for a long time, they were able to catch up rapidly after the Second World War by the incremental innovation that came out of doing. So I'd like to put that out there, that we have to be careful that when we look at the role of government, whether in creation, retention, or utilization of IP, we need to think about not only the radical innovation that comes out of universities, research, fundamental discoveries, and so on, but also the very important incremental that comes out of doing. And doing is critical because it is contextual and it is very focused on what happens here. Pius mentioned that something that happens here and is tailored to this environment has enduring value and is protected from someone just coming to take it over. And then we can have lots of examples of that. Second point I want to make, I said there were 5 of them, is that IP, of course, as we all know, is much greater than patents. And nowadays, we start to see that patent libraries are not getting as, as much value and as much trade as they used to, because there's so many patent libraries out there that you have to have something really special for you to monetize that, okay? There are other kinds of IP that have always been somewhat more valuable. In fact, for example, when you look at things like recipes, right? They're often not patented because nobody wants that recipe out there. What you want is to have the special ingredients, only 2 people know about it, only 1 person knows about it, and that continues to create value for a long time. Now, if we look internally into Nigeria, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of these kinds of things that we have that our grandmothers, grandfathers, forebears have done, which we can patent. Of course, this is not software. We talk about software, we're talking about software, but software has gone far beyond the code that we write. I would like to say that, for example, our genetic code is a form of software, and the data that people are gathering around how the variation of genes and the data around that, gene sets, disease, and all of that. A good example of a company doing things like that is Gene, I think it's called Gene 54. Is that the right name? I'm not quite sure. But this company is doing a lot of work in genetic, laboratory work in Africa. And of course, the data set that they're gathering is extremely valuable, even though you couldn't typically patent that. Algorithms, those algorithms that determine what we see, how we interact, who we get introduced to online and so on. They're also very important IP that I don't see us participating a lot in, and we ought to. So again, how do we direct our efforts into doing this? And thirdly, and very importantly, I think the chairman mentioned this at the beginning of the session, culture. So important IP assets around our music, around our fabric. I remember reading recently that the Ghanaians were looking to sort of get some kind of mark on Kente because it is originally Ghanaian and they don't want it to be. We can see this happening in many other places, like in drinks that come from a specific region of the world and only that region, or cheese. And we see this thing that we don't really understand. And again, the government has to be alive to these opportunities where IP, intellectual property, and the rights that attach to this are far greater than patents only. The third thing I'd like to say relates to what Pius said in his first example. Defending your patent is far more important than being able to do the patent in the first place. In the end, if we do not have systems that enable people to defend their patent against infringement, patenting system is one that says you can patent, but you have to defend and prove your primacy against any infringers. So when you have a big company, fortunately, in Pius's case, this company was local, they could see what was going on. But if a company sitting down halfway across the world, say in New Zealand, in China, in wherever, managed to steal some IP from a Nigerian company, then that company has to find a way to defend itself against that patent infringement. First, they have to know about it, and second, they have to defend themselves, which can be a very expensive process and usually would not even be defended locally. It would have to be defended internationally. So these things are, again, areas where we should look and see how the government can aid the creation, the retention, and the utilization of the patent. So that's point 3. Point 4 is that the network is greater than the individual. So in all discussions of intellectual property and how these things are generated, we really need to realize that long gone are the days of supposedly the lone inventor who creates, amazing inventions and so on. Yes, of course, there were people like Thomas Edison and other people like that who did these kind of things. But more and more, it's a collaborative effort. And scholarly research shows that the interaction between, say, university or research areas, the private sector actually implementing these things, and the government, become 3 pillars of how to get this triple helix of innovation going. And a pillar is obviously the government sector, really typified by the role of DARPA in the United States and their creation of all kinds of technologies, which they then put in the public domain for companies to exploit. These things, the way they work is that DARPA often creates grand challenges and says, we are trying to find out how we can get X, Y, Z to Mars. And then they, give this research grants to universities. Universities work on them. I know I'm out of time, so I have one more thing after this network as an individual. And the last one I'll just talk about is the government and public sector usually greater than the private sector. It's often said that the private sector is has animal spirits. Venture capital, financiers, entrepreneurs, they have animal spirits and they take risk in order to make returns. This idea is being debunked by a lady, Mariana Mazzucato, who's based in the UK and who has written a book called The Entrepreneurial State, essentially showing that governments play a pivotal role and a central role in enabling the private sector to be able to take those risks and to go out and create new things, actually based on research that is often funded by the government. So I will stop here and look forward to a conversation about how the government can really impact on all these areas that I've laid out and what my predecessor was laid out. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Folabi, for rounding it off very nicely and drawing attention to what now concerns government. So let's move to the panel discussion. But before we do, I'd like to give just 2 minutes to Bimbo Abioye, who is the Group Managing Director of Fintrack. Fintrack is a software company in Nigeria as well, and the Group Managing Director is also the Vice President of ISPON. ISPON is the software association that Pius talked about earlier on. So would Bimbo turn on his mic and speak to us for just 2 minutes? You've turned off your mic, please turn it on. Bimbo, your mic is turned off. Well, can you get assistance from the Secretariat?
I think it's using 2 devices, so maybe one of them is logged off right now. Sir.
Yeah, well, turn both of them on. Okay, maybe he will speak later. Let's proceed with the panel until he's able to sort the matter out. Okay, Folabi, you concluded, but I didn't want you to take any breather. I want you to continue. Because you run a private equity fund, essentially, my question to you, turning over to the government role, I just want to ask whether you believe there are ways that we can encourage, from government perspective, investments more or improved investments from local structures. Is there a role for government? How can we catalyze more funding for our startups from Nigeria within the country? Because you are a fund of funds, in the manner of speaking, so you have limited partnerships, really, I suppose. So let's have you start this conversation. What can government do to encourage improved funding of our local startups to ensure that they get enough to have their IP retained in country?
Thank you. Thank you. A very important question. If we start with a little bit of data, I think the latest numbers are that this year we will probably be exceeding $2 billion of investment into the private sector, into venture capital, startup companies, and so on in technology in Nigeria.
Found these results
in Nigeria, and probably 94% or something like that, certainly over 90% of that is coming from foreign sources. The implication of that is that whilst these companies continue to do business in Nigeria, whilst they continue to sell services to Nigerians, whilst they continue to maybe pay some taxes and so on, they are owned effectively by foreigners. And therefore, the long-term value of those companies, for example, when they list on a stock exchange and they get those unicorn statuses, they get those unicorn statuses not here in Nigeria, but somewhere in the New York Stock Exchange, the London Stock Exchange, or somewhere really outside Nigeria. Now, the companies themselves get to that point of being called a unicorn long before sometimes they're profitable. And therein lies the issue. For organizations or people or governments to fund companies that are creating a service or a product that they can continue to sell, in quotes, whilst making a loss, is something that is unique to the private equity and venture capital business. It's hard to imagine that, NECA, Folabi, and Pius set up a company with our own money. So we bring 100,000 naira, 300,000 naira, we start a business. And then we create a product. It cost us 500,000 naira. So we borrowed 200,000 from India. And then after 5 years, we're paying ourselves nothing and we still haven't sold and made a profit. That company will be dead. But you can see companies like Uber, WeWork, blah, blah, blah. Amazon took 10 years before they could declare a profit. Tesla incredible. They're not making any money. In fact, in Tesla's case, for example, they got some of these grants for solar, renewables, and so on and so forth. Now, the whole story I'm telling here is that somehow somebody is funding the continued losses of these businesses whilst they are gaining market share, testing out the technology, improving it in all sorts of spheres. Who does that? How is that being done? Well, to some extent, in the private sector, but like I said in my comments, an initial thrust would be the government saying we need to move, for example, from fossil fuels to renewable energy, and therefore we're going to create a $1 billion fund. And I think Pius mentioned a slush fund. Well, we can call it slush, they can call it hawk, they can call it so many things that is called all over the world. But this fund would then be given to subsidize companies that are pushing in the direction the government wants them to take. And not just companies. Universities will get part of it. Individual researchers will get part of it. Venture capital might get part of it, as first loss provision. So they say to venture capital companies, look, if you invest in companies that are bringing new technologies to the market, we will provide you with a guarantee of first loss. So if you put in $10 million, well, the first $1 million you lose, we will pay. They don't pay the money up front. They just say, do your best with this company. If the money is lost, the first $1 million we will pay you. And then it's only if you lose more than $1 million that you really have a loss. Well, of course, PE would do that. They also incentivize individuals. If you look at the UK, for example, they have the various EISs. I think they're called entrepreneurial investment schemes, which allow individuals to get tax breaks on the money they invest into startups. None of these things actually is operational in Nigeria. In fact, the opposite is true. If you're a startup, you bear the brunt of all the taxes. You bear the brunt of all the incursions by various local government agencies and so on and so forth. You're assaulted, you're assailed by all kinds of laws. You're not protected. If you're in a hub, you might have a bit of protection, but if you're on your own, well, you are really on your own. So the government can do a lot, even just by looking around. I'll mention one thing about, I was looking at the startup and innovation policies and how they came about. And the first one was from Italy many, many years ago, but a very interesting one was one from Senegal. I was amazed to read that in Senegal, if you start up a company, the government will guarantee the pay for the top 2 or top 3 funders for the first 2 years, allowing people to actually focus on creating a new business, employ people, create technology, create investments. So those are 2 areas. I'll say one more, then I'll let the lady and gentleman take it up from there. At one point, we were spending a lot of time with the Bank of Industry trying to unlock some of the capital they have for software companies and companies in the new economy. And they kept asking us for collateral. So they kept asking, where is the collateral? Do they have collateral? Do they have collateral? Well, I think there's such a thing as IP-based collateral. There is a framework that is being developed globally for that. We suggested some of these frameworks to Bank of Industry. They, of course, agreed to take a look at them. But, the wheels of government grind slow. They may grind fine, but it takes a very long time. But again, that's a third way of looking at it, to say, well, can you get some IP-based collateral to assist companies that are in these businesses scale and be able to sell to their public? Thank you. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to get Bimbo to speak now, but he's still having trouble with his microphone. So I would let Pius, if you want to intervene
I think
on the
it could
subject.
speak now.
Hello?
I think you could speak now.
Okay, Bimbo. Oh no, it's turned off again. Okay, Bimbo, go ahead. Your mic is turned down. If you can hear me, please speak. Oh, okay. It's a bit of a challenge. We will still give him time, hoping he will be able to speak. Pius, did you want to add something to what Falabi had said about the role of government in, for instance, de-risking investments and encouraging those kinds of investment coming in? I know that NECA will have a go at it too after you. Please go ahead.
Certainly, certainly. I'm a product of the American software industry. I schooled in the US, worked in the corporate America, and I was part of what we call the Beltway Bandits, all the companies offering software services to the major defense contractors out there in Washington, DC. Now, if I bring that experience back home here, I have a situation currently where we're about to sign an agreement. This agency is requesting a software service to be delivered to them. It is there's only one of its kind. You cannot have two of such software services for that kind of organization and any other organization. It is the only one that can offer that. So the question that I asked them, who will retain the IP? My argument is that I have to retain the IP because all the ideas, the notion, the look and feel, the entire product itself must come from me. But I would need their protection to make sure that I could now sell this IP across the West African region. That's one. Now, you can now find that there are, in fact, the question they now had is that, okay, in the contract they are going to give me, am I going to be able to put down a, what do you call it, an advance payment guarantee? Falabi just made reference to that. How in the hell am I supposed to put down an advance payment guarantee on a software solution that you don't know how it is going to be written? I know how it is going to be written. I have the domain knowledge. I have the domain expertise. And you're asking me to come and put down we're talking about a huge chunk of money as an advance payment guarantee. So I pick up the phone and I call Nigerian Communication Commission. Now, believe it or not, those guys have, I call it a slush fund, okay? But the NCC is making an attempt to fund startups, innovation, and they're doing it quietly, very quietly. And I must applaud them. They're actually taking the bull by the horn, even if the outcome is different. But they have a slush fund. Now that fund, one can now go to them and say, look, guys, here's a problem, a unique problem I have. I need to take ownership of this IP. But for me to now do this project, I need to be able to put down money as an APG. How can you help out with this kind of APG? Because coming out of COVID, nobody has that kind of money to be putting down as an APG. And unfortunately, insurance-based APGs are no longer accepted by MDAs or by any one of all these companies. They want bank APGs. And what will a bank tell you to do? Come and put the cash down. So this is all for me to be able to own the IP. That's basically what all this is all about. If the project now belongs to, say, this agency, what then do we do? And if they own that IP, they're going to mismanage it big time. I know that for a fact. Now, so I have also made sure that that conversation doesn't move in their favor. They've accepted in principle that we will take ownership of the IP so that we can have an opportunity to extend that to the West African region where it can benefit all the other countries that would need to use it down the line. And of course, this is in line with the Africa Free Trade Agreement, or Africa Free Trade Area. Is that what, yeah, Africa Free Trade Area, I think that's what it's called. Now,
It's also agreement, actually.
Okay, it's agreement, all right. So now, how now do we now worry about IP along that line? So I need to be sure that one can solidify and make sure that that IP is fully registered, whatever you want to call it, whether it is registration, whether it is a patent, however you want to call it, it is recognized as such, so that some person in some country won't come and take a look at my software and go and replicate it in his own country. One has to be able to know that there will be an infringement if you try to do that in your own country, knowing that we already have something to do the same thing. These are the elements that become very, very necessary in recognizing why the federal government must sit up very quickly. They must sit up and understand the importance of intellectual property creation, retention, ownership, registration, the whole enchilada. And it has to be done quickly. Now, if NCC, Nigerian Communication Commission, is going to be the driver of this, all well and good. I don't have a problem with which agency should do it, whether it is NITDA, whether it is NOTAP. Well, let's not talk about NOTAP, but whoever does it, it has to be done quickly, and it must be coordinated to encourage.
Let's talk about NOTAP, Pius. Why not?
I don't want to talk about NOTAP. Falabi can talk about NOTAP. Nneka can talk. I won't talk about NOTAP because nothing good will come out of my mouth, and I don't want to do that. So the point, what I'm trying to say is, let the federal government take the bull by the horn and quickly ramp up its internal knowledge in how to manage IP creation, IP retention, IP, everything in and around IP, to encourage young entrepreneurs and provide some level of awareness and education to make them comfortable to know that, listen, if you create IP that we think is strategic or even tactical for the Nigerian environment, they can now step in and do something about it. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, excellent. It does help. I want to drill this a bit deeper, but Nneka is dropped off the call. Let's wait. Let's expect her to rejoin. But while we're waiting for her, and while we're waiting for Bimbo, I need to get information that Bimbo is willing to speak. I'll come back to you, Falabi. And both of you agree that there is a role for government. How will that role be articulated? In what form? And what specifics do you recommend so that we will take this to government and they know the steps we require them to take to enable IP creation and enable or ensure IP retention? Whether the retention is in the form of de-risking investments from PEs and VCs, for instance, or whether it's an outright grant themselves, like the NSIA is an investment fund, the Nigeria Sovereign Investment Fund, or well, they call it authority, really. Or whether there's a Bank of Industry fund, whether there's even a technology fund that's required. What is the process that you recommend? Nneka is coming on, but please take a go at this perspective before she rejoins.
Yeah, we're not going to be able to escape going back to NOTAP. NOTAP is I think is the National Office for Technology Acquisition and Promotion.
Yeah.
And they are, the Wipro arm and, Connect in Nigeria. So essentially, from the perspective of intellectual property rights, they are the umbrella body that should manage the processes that we are talking about. And I said, well, manage is the wrong word. Let me use a slightly better word. Let's say coordinate, because IPR is so complex. It's a network of complexity, which means that there can't be a central control. If you try to control it, you probably stifle it. So what they need to understand, and I think this is part of the problem that we see in NOTAP, that rather than a command and control situation, they should have an organization that in itself is learning and also spurring learning. Learning is a mutual, beneficial, complex, emergent activity that leads to the creation of knowledge and new knowledge. But if you have a calcified type of structure stuck in a linear method of thinking, then you will start to have issues. And then what you see is fragmentation of the government's efforts in stimulating innovation, stimulating the creation of IPRs, the management of IPRs, and so on and so forth. And we see that already. So all the agencies that you mentioned in here, and of course the one that Pius mentioned at the beginning, there's a national, I think, the Nigerian Content Management Development Board. There's the Nigerian Development Agency. There is the Bank of Industry. There's the Sovereign Wealth Fund, or the NSIA, Sovereign Investment Authority. I mean, the acronyms just pile one on the other, on the other, on the other, on the other, on the other. In fact, we shouldn't forget organizations like PTTF, who started out as a Petroleum Training Development Fund and became Petroleum Technology Development Fund, and essentially was trying to create some IP. And then you can go on into the Education Trust Fund and so on and so forth, TED Fund. So somebody has to be at the center of this and really looking at how all the IP that is being generated is being harnessed, put together, and actually essentially being utilized and monetized. That organization in Nigeria should be NOTAP. So maybe we can start with saying, can we shine an X-ray into NOTAP? Sorry, Pius, you will not be able to escape this. One day we might have to go put you or Inye or Neka, not me, but one of you go and run this organization. And we just shine a spotlight on the organization and make sure they understand their role in helping and coordinating, coaxing universities, government agencies. What Pius is talking about now is what a form of procurement-driven innovation. Why is it that other countries give contracts for new things to their own companies rather than looking for foreign companies to give them to? Because they want the knowledge that comes from that thing to be resident in their own companies rather than a company that has come from wherever it is coming from. So there are all these things, but when you need to find a home for them, the home is there. Like so many other things in Nigeria, we have structures, but we don't execute. Again, back to what I started out from, ideas or strategies or papers, or whatever you plans, they're worthless, but the execution is everything. So I would say that we need, maybe not on this call because NOTAP is not here, but we need to engage with the agency of government that is actually tasked with this role. Of course, once they start to understand their role, we can look at that very complex and stressful web of interactions and linkages of all the actors in the innovation system, and then see what NOTAP should do for each one of them. What do we do? What should NOTAP be doing with Bank of Industry, for example, in trying to help them to create what I described as IP-based collateral, right? What should they be trying to do with NSIA and the pension funds to try and create a fund that will fund private equity and venture capital to fund the companies that need the funding? What should they do with universities and hubs? I mean, I was a director of the Ideas Hub. Ideas Hub was a good idea that was, set up, a good idea to spur, innovation, development, and so on, technology. It was right next to CC Hub in Yaba, right there. They shared a wall. And after 2 or 3 years, the funding agency in the government decided that they were no longer funding. I mean, he knows this story intimately because we sat on that board together. For some reason, the funding dried up, there were some issues and so on and so forth, and Ideas Hub went away. CC Hub, next to it, has grown in leaps and bounds and now actually has a small fund that itself is distributed and using to encourage the companies that are in the hub right there. Essentially, all of these things need to be coordinated. We cannot just be having siloed information. I'll say one more thing. I mean, there was I don't know perhaps whether they're involved in this. There's a big NITEL training center somewhere in Lagos. And of course, NITEL, the old NITEL, they had a lot of infrastructure all over the place. And there was a big push at some point to create a very big campus, a software campus. There were people from Carnegie Mellon University and so on who were keen to bring in their technology, their information, their professors, and so on. Everything is in that hub in Oshodi area. And I believe that until today, that place is still lying fallow. NOTAP needs to have an X-ray and be strengthened to coordinate. The legislation of NOTAP should give it more power to bring in and to convene all these other elements in the system, the innovation ecosystem, and well, let's say almost compel them to act in a way that is in accordance with actually what we have in the documented strategy. So we have a documented strategy, but there's no one to actually make that thing work. So that's my, let's say, opening salvo on that matter.
Okay, thank you. Your salvo, yeah, you've shot it. I hear you. Falabi, and you're talking about NOTAP's law. Incidentally, it takes an average of 4 years to get any law passed, really, before it's even accented to. Average, sometimes much more than 4 years. But the good news is that NOTAP has the powers of subsidiary legislation. It can make regulation under its law. In the same way, it used that law to come up with the local vendor policy that allowed Nigerian companies to implement, be part of software implementation of the multinational companies and get 40% of the service cost, really. So they did well with that local vendor policy. So I would say rather than recommend an outright amendment of their law within the ambit of the current legislation they have, are there things they can do within the law NIDA has? Are there things NIDA can do specifically? And I really wanted those recommendations because we didn't bring NOTAP onto this call, but NIDA is. There are a lot of NIDA staff who are on the call. I am also associated with NIDA on a different level, not as a staff or employee. But the agency is in dire need of stakeholder support and input. So what should they do? Let me ask a specific question to all of you, Nneka as well. Would you, for instance, suggest developing a framework for IP rights retention in Nigeria? With a policy, with a framework that they implement, any of these agencies be an appropriate way to go? But let Nneka intervene now that she's back on the call, and I hope you have rights as a panelist. Nneka. Your mic is off. Could you turn it on? Great.
Okay, I'm back. There's an echo.
Did you hear me?
I can, but there's a bad.
Oh, really? But we can hear you clearly, though.
Okay, so I'll just proceed then. Apologies. My connection got off. I used fiber and yeah. So yeah, so I mean, I think your question is a good question, but I think it's at almost the end of the continuum, right? In sales and marketing, it's called a funnel. In investment is in venture capitalists, equity investments, it's called a pipeline. Before we can start having those type of conversations, we have to have some kind of critical mass of IP. And for us to have a critical mass of IP, we have to be strategic on a national level. As Falabi mentioned, and also Pius to a lesser extent, there is a huge role for government to play because innovation is expensive, right? Innovation is expensive, R&D is expensive, it takes time. And if you don't have patient funds, and this is even part of the reason why we're seeing more foreign funds in our investment space than local funds, especially for earlier businesses, because their markets are more mature, they understand the timelines involved, and they also understand the characteristics of the market. We are more into trading goods, so we can see, and even to a certain extent services. So we can see, for instance, if I want to sell something, I can see what it is that I want to sell, and I know I'm going to get this money back in this particular time frame. If you're talking about investing capital, patient capital, for instance, my patient capital versus, you know, the cost of funds locally doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense to investors. It's only a few that have been able to grab it. But your question ties into what I was going to talk about, and I was really going to talk about R&D as an investment and how public sector needs to look at that. And like Falabi said, you know, making sure that there are different opportunities to create and capture IP. If we have that if we view that holistically, then we know, for instance, universities, colleges of technology, hubs. Those are all locations where IP can be created. And then if we are deliberately developing that culture of innovation, then we will have a pipeline of IP to create, and then at some point we can now talk about defending or protecting the IP. Right now, we're not creating enough IP, and that's just really sad. And another thing is that there's
but how should we? How can we?
There's some IP that's being created that has been registered and protected abroad. Because maybe that's what the investors feel better, more comfortable with. If we're talking about how, for instance, we can now create that funnel or that pipeline, again, for me, it's a continuum. We have to have a strategic conversation on a national level about investing in R&D, not just public sector, but private sector. The countries that we're seeing the most development in their R&D.
Oh dear, is it my system or we're losing NECA? We will see if she's able to reconnect shortly. But let me go to Bimbo. He wanted to speak all this while. Bimbo, can you turn on your mic now and speak while we wait for NECA?
Yeah, I'm on now.
Great.
Nice reaching out to you. Nice being part of this conversation that is going on. Yeah, I have 3 perspectives to contribute. One is coming from our culture as African. I don't know who did that to us, and we are unable to come out of it. An African believes that whatever is imported is superior to what they can do. And until we reorientate ourselves from that box, that black box, there cannot be progress. Because every dollar, so that is why almost every African economy is a consumer economy. We import and import and import and import and import. And every importation, every dollar you spend on foreign items, you are enriching those foreign countries. You are creating employment in those foreign nations. And then you look around and say your people are unemployed. And then you see people finding expression in all kinds of social crisis, Boko Haram, kidnapping, and whatever you. Until we reverse that, I don't know how we can. I believe we can with a serious mass reorientation in each of the national domains. The second contribution is the fact that IP laws that we have are not protective at all, at all, at all, at all. In fact, very useless. And we have tested that. We have copyrights, we've copyrighted our products. Okay, so the threats to IP are both internal and external. And I will start with internal. I think Pius alluded to that. Okay, so we have some products that in fact stand down every foreign options in that line, in that realm. They can't just match it. So in fact, the biggest names in technology have sought to work with us in their own environment to see how they could get around that and what have you. But now you have some of our ex-staff exposed to these ideas and the methodologies to implement those ideas and everything, and what have you. And then when they go out there, despite these are copyrighted things, they go out there and then why does IT, and despite all agreement they have signed, non-compete, confidentiality and all of those things, they go and recreate these things possibly even with a different tool, a different language, and what have you. And especially at the end of the day, the thing can replace what you are offering. And we took that to WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization. They set up a remediation process, which is ongoing now. But I can tell you the thing really is not really going to be very useful. You know, at the end of the day, legal, they want to protect commerce. You know, there should be no, what do you call it, monopoly of whatever, you know, and you know, the monopoly has not even been created. If we are not lucky that the way we structure our organization is in strategic business units and what have you, if those guys have access to all of our something, in fact, our business will be threatened today. Okay, so, but the law really is not helpful. In fact, copyright is bullshit nonsense. I can tell you that. The other one is external IP. Most of our fintech companies have been bought, sold. And I will not blame the promoters. The country, whether it's worth killing yourself for, is another level of conversation altogether. So these people have developed IP and what have you, and then there's a company out there ready to pump money into them, they will sell. Okay, why can't government be the one pumping money into IP? What is our National Sovereign Investment, NSIA, whatever fund? What is it for? The other day, there was a window that CBN created for some 500 million loan to organizations in information technology and what have you. And they're asking for collateral security, big building. What do I need the building of 500 million for? What do I need plant and machinery of 500 million for? Can't they invest in intellectual assets, you know, which is valued? These are some of the things that they need to really wake up and really do something about. I don't need the properties, I don't need the equipment. What I need is people, and these people is our biggest investment, and it costs a whole lot of money, a lot of funds. Okay, so that is on one side. The other side is we have been deceived as Africans to say that we cannot do some things, and I don't know how we can break that jinx. Even our leaders believe that we don't have capacity, even in Nigeria, as blessed as we are with intellectual capacity in this nation. Foreign organizations are coming. There was a conversation we were having at one forum, and somebody representing one of the foreign OEMs was coming with a high shoulder kind of a thing that, you know, we don't have capacity to do. I had to stop him on that conversation. Okay, so today we have products that stamp down all of these big names in banking industry in Nigeria. We have replaced a whole lot of them, but there is no regulatory support. Some, for whatever they still want to do, they will buy that foreign thing, even if it doesn't work for them. Maybe some, because the staff that are appraising these things, they will say, oh, this one give us opportunity to go to India or to go to Frankfurt or whatever to go and do training. NOTAP needs to come up with a legislation to remove that. Any training or whatever that has to happen and that must happen in the country. So that removes that. I tell you, some people, they switch decisions just because of simple thing of ESTA code to overseas. Oh, this one is local. There is no ESTA code. Oh, this one is foreign. We are going to Switzerland, we are going to Frankfurt, we are going to Belgium. So all of these things, until we address them, we are going nowhere. NOTAP also have been tutored to believe that we don't have capacity. So we are there only to support foreign OEMs. So thousands and hundreds of thousands of people being trained in ICT, they have been trained to be salesmen. It is sad, very sad. And until we wake up out of that, this country is going nowhere. In fact, there is no hope until we address those issues. Okay, so
Thank you,
so those are my few contributions. I can go on and on, you know, because the show pinches me on this side. So
I know.
I don't know.
But I know the shoe pinches you. I also know you would like to leave, but don't go yet. I do want to take you up on your last but one statement, which is about NOTAP. I happen to know NOTAP sufficiently well, really, to speak in its defense regarding just that point about its love, or well, its pretense not to know there is capacity in Nigeria. As you are Vice President of ISPON, NOTAP is on record for having requested ISPON and NIDA to give it the database of Nigerian solutions or capacity, so that when registering foreign technology, agreements of foreign technology services, really, it would look into that database and see what Nigeria has. So has ISPON responded, and have you got a feedback on it? But that's for you to think about deeply and follow up to see if NOTAP has that database. But thank you, though, for pointing out something specific, asking for regulation by NOTAP. That's specific. We've thrown up a lot of problems. I am keen on having the solutions. We have heard the problems, but we need to go to the solutions. What must government do in specific terms? And government will mean agencies like CBN, agencies like Bank of Industries, NIDA, NOTAP, National Sovereign Investment Authority, whatever, where the funds exist. What do we need government to do specifically so that leaving this webinar, we can articulate the recommendations of the gentleman and lady who are panelists, and all those of you who are also speaking as attendees like Bimbo. And I hope there'll be more such interventions. There's even a question for panelists there, and I think you should have a go at it. But before you do, let's allow Nneka conclude her thoughts on the matter.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Bimbo. I mean, you know, it's different when you have conversations with people in the field. You know, the conversations are different, and there is a general sense of disappointment, and there's a lot more that can be done. And I generally feel that one of the biggest challenges that we have is that there seems to be a communication chasm between private sector and public sector. We cannot be working in conflict with each other. That's not how it works. All the countries where innovation is being propelled all have public sector investments in R&D. China, Israel, UAE, the UK, the US, they all have, if you check in their current or in their past, they have all had government intervention in R&D, because as I was saying before I got cut off, R&D is expensive. And if the country or the government sees it as an investment and they see it as an opportunity to create wealth, then there should be resources that should be allocated. If we allocate those resources, then we will create and build new solutions, not just using solutions from other countries. If we create and build solutions that are funded by the government will want to see ROI, they will want to see investment, they will trust the solution. And they too should have KPIs that are tied to this investment. And then we would now see it would no longer be a system for us pushing our technology, pushing our IP, pushing locally developed solutions for use in government. Government will want to recoup their investment, and then they will be adopting the solutions that have been created and channeled by their investments in R&D, in educational institutions, and in hubs. We also need to have a conversation about ease of doing business, because that ties into IP retention as well. A lot of businesses spend a lot on R&D, and then even the environment does not necessarily support them. I was in a session recently with Chinaya of ISPON, who mentioned that there is a provision in FIRS for R&D, for tax deductions for R&D. Businesses don't know that. So we have all of this cost that is coming onto businesses because they are doing their R&D as well as their business development. And then the environment is not necessarily the easiest to work in. This is a global market, as I said earlier. The same talent, and talent is our biggest resource, right? These innovations are coming from talents, which are human beings. The same talents that is not being regarded here. The same IP that is not being treated as a national strategy here is being treated as a national strategy in other places. Rwanda is positioning itself as Africa's preferred technology hub, specifically as Africa's sandbox. Bring your solution and come and test it in Rwanda. There was a recent case of a young Nigerian who has a business here, a talent-based business for tech talent, and due to frustrations, went to Rwanda, got his residency within a couple of hours, got his business and his residency within a couple of hours, and he literally packed up his business and went to Rwanda. That's just one case. There are others, and it's not just Rwanda. You know, we need to be very deliberate about how we are treating our talents and the IP that is being created out of Nigeria. And you know, if we're being deliberate, again, as I was mentioning earlier, there is a continuum. There's R&D, there's creating an enabling environment with business support and even concessions for innovators, for investors. People don't want to put their money where tomorrow a regulation will help them turn it into tissue paper.
Nneka, may I interrupt, Nneka?
Yes.
May I interrupt? I like what you're saying, but I don't want it to be in the air only. You're talking about the country deliberately intervening in R&D, for instance, and ensuring that these companies, or well, there's an ease of doing business to start with, and there's also a way to encourage these companies to stay longer and build their solutions in country, right? That's the direction you're trying to go. You gave the example of the company that went to Rwanda. Excellent. But how can we achieve that in Nigeria? Which agency do you think can lead that charge? Can you name names? Can you make suggestions on what they should do?
To be very honest, I can't name names because we are not clear whose remit stops where, right? We've called NOTAP, we've called NIDA, we're not sure whose remit ends where, right? And again, and I think it was Falabi that mentioned, or maybe it was Mr. Kibo, I'm not sure, about how, you know, there are different organizations, you don't know, there are different government parastatals, you don't know who to speak to. Whoever it is, and even that's even part of the ease of doing business, who should we be speaking to at any point in time? We're not saying it should not be one agency, but even for us to know for this particular thing, this is who we should be speaking to. In the NIDA Act, which we're not sure if it is a legit document, there are conversations around owning the IP process as well. And then we have NOTAP. So who do we talk to? So I can't name names, unfortunately, because I'm not sure everybody is clear who we should hold. You've seen Falabi and Pius having the conversation of don't talk about NOTAP, talk about NOTAP, because we're not really sure who's owning what, right? And again, if we have that national strategy and have that mindset that this is what we're doing, this thing should not be ambiguous to us. We should know specifically who we should be speaking to and where and at what point, right? And the support that is being provided. So I hope I've answered your question by not answering your question.
I'll give you a tip. You know, you said you wouldn't name names, but there's an easy way of naming names when you don't want to name one name. Is to name several. You can say in Nigeria, these agencies should get together and do so and so.
That I've named them. I've named them. Even industrial training funds. Industrial training fund needs to be a part of the conversation. The Ministry of Education needs to be a part of the conversation. NUC, the Nigeria University Commission, needs to be a part of the conversation. There are several bodies that need to be part of the conversation. If we map what it is that we are trying to do, which is why I keep saying that, and you know, it's probably going to start sounding like a broken record. If we sit down and say, this is what we are trying to do, we're seeing that there's a lot of activity coming out of the innovation and tech ecosystem in Nigeria. We're seeing that these youths are creating things. We're seeing that ISPON and their members are creating things. We're seeing that there's a lot of activity. The response, and that unfortunately is what we feel the response is. Again, there may be a chasm of communication, but the response is, what can we take from them? Oh, they're making this money, how can we get a piece of it? We don't even have the right regulation that we need to have right now to create, again, an enabling environment. So the people that are investing are almost doing it at a premium because there isn't a base to say, this can't happen to my cash if it's put in Nigeria, right? So, and that was the last thing I was going to come to on the continuum, which is investability. If we have the R&D, the ease of business and the enabling environment, we will create solutions. As we create solutions, then we can create IP and own the IP. Then we can have investable businesses. At that point, we should not have the conversation of who can invest and how much needs to be retained locally, if that is the part of the national strategy that wants to be considered, right? And then when we have investable businesses, then we can now see higher multiples coming out of this business and even coming out of investment as innovation as an investment. And I'll use a very famous example, Xerox PARC. Xerox PARC in the 70s was funded by Xerox, and it was basically the innovation hub at the time, right? And a lot of the devices and solutions that we're using now, the mouse, internet, of course, the printer, all of those things, a lot of them either had like Folabi said, were either radically produced or incrementally produced out of Xerox PARC. There was a budget that was brought for the development and sustenance of Xerox PARC for decades. The ROI from Xerox PARC, they stopped counting it because how do you count, for instance, the ROI on a mouse or on internet or on the fact that you and I can have this conversation and I'm in Lagos and you're in Abuja? How do you count that ROI? Investment is, innovation is very expensive, but someone needs to fund it. And that's where I think we should start from. And people will not fund what they cannot see. We need to have a strategic framework around innovation in Nigeria, developing innovation as one of
framework around innovation in Nigeria. Great.
Yes,
go ahead.
Not one of the non-oil pillars that we're looking at developing. Also for youth engagement. If we develop that, then all of these things will come in, as I've mentioned. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Nneka. Let's listen to Folabi. He's had his hand up for a while now. You wanted to intervene.
Yeah, okay. Just before, can I just make a comment before Folabi?
Okay. Then Folabi afterwards. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, Folabi. I just wanted to remind you that that whole NETDA stuff, you forgot that I was the vice chairman of NETDA under Idea Hub under Dr. Suleiman. Yes. And there's something else I wanted to point out. There was an unwritten understanding that Idea Hub was going to be deliberately designed to fail. And the reason was very simple. We knew that funding was going to be a challenge down the line. We knew that ab initio. So, but the whole idea was that Idea Hub was supposed to become an injection into the whole idea of startups being created, and that's exactly what happened. So I just wanted to throw that in as a reminder. And then on the comment on who should do the funding, I'm of the opinion is that for today, the best agency or ministry or whatever to help fund this type of innovation that Nneka is and Afolabi is talking about, it has to be an agency with the requisite budget. Now, which agency would I be the one to now suggest? For now, I'm just saying for now, it could change in a year, 2 years, depending on which new administration comes in. For now, I would be suggesting Nigerian Communication Commission. You know why? They actually have a deliberate policy currently to fund startups. They're even going about educating startups and trying to see how they can inject some funds to help generate this whole startup innovation in the various geopolitical zones. And they've got the budget for it. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not saying that they are the right people normally, but in the circumstances, how can we get them to start doing something immediately? That's one agency that can actually make an attempt at it now, only because they now have the internal knowledge to understand the importance and significance of startups and innovation. So they will be in a better position to fund it. So I just wanted to throw that in very quickly as the conversation goes on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pius. Thank you, Pius. But look at it this way. Suppose this institution you mentioned became like a limited partner to a venture capital fund, where annually it allocates some amount of money from its own budget into a technology fund that is managed by a VC, for instance, because its primary role may not be to fund startups, but nothing stops it from giving money to a VC to seed into those startups, for instance. Now, imagine if 10 of such agencies do the same thing. Wouldn't we have a pool of funds, call it technology fund, for instance,
that the VCs can take advantage of? Yes.
Precisely. Now,
I can accept that. I can accept that.
Gentlemen.
Now, Folabi, you have the microphone. Go ahead.
Please permit me to jump in.
This is your area, actually.
Yes, exactly. So that's why I thought I should just jump in right here.
I'm happy you did.
I want to talk about 3 things quickly. One of them, I mean, I think some of them have been talked about in the past, but one of them is this idea we've spoken about a couple of times here about foreigners, foreign software, foreign this, foreign that, foreign capital as well, which I talk about quite a bit. So I want to say that it's not by chance that there are ERPs like Oracle, say Microsoft, blah, blah, and they've been developed and they've grown and they've survived throughout the world. It's not by chance. And we should be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, like I said, I was the first employee of one of these OEMs in West Africa. And whilst it was an expensive solution, it is still an expensive solution. It was expensive for a reason. Everybody who is a software practitioner would agree that creating software that is of high quality, that will not fail, and so on and so forth, is expensive. Nneka has talked about it, Pius has experienced, and so on. And I want to say that what we did with that, and it's an example of what we can do, we used that to create hundreds of consultants who knew how to use, implement, develop on the platform of SAP. And those people created value locally, but also created value internationally for themselves and for the country. So we shouldn't take that and throw it away. I'm not saying that we don't have skilled people, but when you look at the number of people sitting down in the development hubs for an SAP in Palo Alto, in Bangalore, and well in Germany, we're talking about tens of thousands of highly skilled, highly trained developers working together as one. And it will take us a bit of time to get to that level. We should learn from them, grow on their backs. And I just say that, for example, for SAP specifically, we should also understand that, for example, when SAP was going to create a version for small and medium scale businesses, they actually bought a software called, Top Manage. And Top Manage was written by a Israeli gentleman in Israel, on the back of a locally developed accounting package in Israel. So what we should also be looking at is not just growing from scratch, because that is a very long road we're going to go on to get to the end. We should be very strategic about what we borrow. I won't use other terms. We could beg for it, we could borrow it, and then strategically build on it, create our own. So that's one thing. I don't want us to, dismiss international OEMs and the expense out of hand. I would say that may not be completely called for, or even financially wise. So that's one. Second thing I want to talk about is what Inye said. Before I get to the financing, is like who should be in the driving seat for what we're talking about here. What we are talking about, and the reason it's so, it's such an interesting conversation, is that it is like this elephant that we're all going to touch from different angles. Universities R&D, innovation R&D, investors, entrepreneurs, legal people, accountants and accounting. All kinds of people are going to be involved in this process of trying to create innovation. And that's why we keep talking about innovation systems, innovation ecosystems, and the complexity of webs, and in fact, the importance of linkages even more than the particular nodes themselves. What this tells me is that what we'll have is a coordinator, or let's say in an orchestra, you have a conductor. The conductor is not playing an instrument, but is ensuring that he or she is bringing in the right instrument at the right volume, at the right pitch, at the right time to create very melodious and pleasing music. And so the question that we should first be asking ourselves is, who should be the conductor of the orchestra, the complex orchestra that is our innovation ecosystem? Who should that be? I think that in the panoply of all agencies in Nigeria, we still have to say that is NOTA. I've not studied their law recently, but even from their name, the Office of Technology Acquisition and Promotion, in fact, it used to be, and you need to help me, I think it was NOIP. It used to be the National Office of Industrial Property, right, which was essential. Industrial property, I think that was, but it was essentially like an IP, and as Wipro is actually the IP agency in Nigeria. So that's the conductor. Now, let's take it into how do we implement this, and what happens. One of the ways that we've seen that happen, and Pius talked about the Beltway bandits, and he mentioned something very important. He said they were defense contractors. Defense industries in the United States consume a huge amount of the budget. Can you hear me? Am I still audible?
Yes.
Okay. Very much so.
Yeah, because I could see something refreshing on my screen, so I was wondering what's going on. Okay, so the defense industries in the United States consume a lot of the GDP and create a lot of GDP because they're always looking for ways to create newer, faster, better, more deadly, whatever it is, more stealthy weapons. And these are huge, huge, huge expenditures by the government, plus what they call big challenges, like I've mentioned already. The recent one was around solar energy, renewables, and so on. And we might know of Solera. Solera was a company that was funded with $500 million by the Obama government and failed. But what they learned in that session, in that experiment, was huge. Can we afford that? Maybe not. Maybe we can't afford $500 million, but can we afford a system that brings in the big challenges of our time, of our country, right, and looks for local solutions to them by providing funding in a structured manner? Yes. Who should coordinate that? Again, we should have a feeder system. Anybody should be able to say, here is a big challenge. And many organizations do that. They have big challenges. They say, well, here's a challenge fund. There's a company called AGRA, which is a nonprofit looking at green revolution in Africa. And they have, under AGRA, they have the AECF, the African Enterprise Challenge Fund, which from time to time puts out calls and says, we are trying to find the best way of doing A, B, C, D, E, and we're going to give away some money to do this, and people should come with their proposals. All the agencies we talked about should provide funding. And people should be able to either put in ideas of questions that should be solved, and then should be able to apply and put up proposals for the funding again, the coordination should be by NOTAP. So again, maybe NOTAP has under it, as you said, an arm that creates these challenge funds that directs the money. Now, I'm careful not to say give it to VCs, because VCs are looking for return, only return. And as Neka said, well, R&D and patents are not necessarily just about return. The return may not come for years. I mean, let's take a very recent example. Today, Moderna is the toast of the biotechnology industries and genetic industry and so on, because they are forerunners of the technique called mRNA, which is one of the bases of vaccinations that everybody is trying to get now in the whole world against COVID. But what we don't know is that Moderna is at least 10 years in the development of this technology, at least, and several millions of dollars, in fact, partly funded by the United States government. And today, there is a patent dispute because Moderna is trying to register the patent and has excluded the US government scientists from that registration. But my point there is that it was a long-term thing, 10 years and still counting for them to actually get to a point where they could actually use the technology we were developing to actually create a vaccination that now being commercialized. So this agency as a subset of NOTAP could be like a DARPA, could be like whoever, who is coordinating ideas, coordinating proposals, and essentially then everybody, ITF, PTDF, Bank of Industry, DBN, the Development Bank of Nigeria, as we speak, is on a hunt to give money to VCs, right? As to spur these kind of things. Coordination is what we don't have. Silos of things all firing all over the place. We can't get it right that way. We have to have someone who's steering the ship. A conductor needs to be appointed and empowered to do the work of conducting. What does that mean? It means that these other agencies agree to allow the conductor conduct. Because if they all stand on their own individual powers, they will not go very far. And so I think I would suggest that we need to look at, really empowering, again, is acquisition and promotion, I'll say it's NOTAP, them to conduct this orchestra and bring everybody together in a harmonious whole without necessarily having to do everything themselves, but they should do the work of coaching, conducting, and making it work. That's my submission.
Okay. Thank you, Folabi, and thank you, gentlemen and ladies. We're going to start winding down this webinar. We have done almost 2 hours already, and we shouldn't overshoot 2 hours by a lot of time. So, but I want to ask you all to think of your concluding comments, a minute each. But before I get to that conclusion, I just wanted to respond quickly to your first point when you were intervening, Folabi. No one, not Bimbo and not Pio, certainly, is suggesting that we should ignore the multinational OEMs. Not at all. What local content means to us is to us be part of the value chain. Rather than becoming mere marketing officers, we should also be in the development part of it. If we have solutions that they can integrate theirs into, why not? Or if we can help build out those solutions, just like they have 10,000 engineers in Palo Alto, for instance, can they have a 5,000 campus in Nigeria, for instance, getting Nigerians involved in the process? So that's how we can piggyback and learn. We can learn by simply consuming totally and not being part of the value chain. Nigerian computer assemblers today were all before marketing, Compaq, marketing, HP and all that, and they began to assemble after a while. Now, if that had continued, they would have become real international OEMs dominating West Africa, really. So you learn from doing. That's my point.
Absolutely right. Let me give you look. Practically I was there, right? And you know this. So
yes.
So starting SAP, of course, it was a sales job. But if you sell a software like that, typically you're saying when you sell $1 of software, there's $3 of services to be created. Okay, and even though the software is code is created somewhere and so on and so forth, in the end you have to implement this, and that is a lot of contextual knowledge in the company, which is supposed to be done by local, well, not by local, by people who do that, and they're consultants and so on. one of the things I did was to ensure that we deliberately set up a training center, and we said there is nothing sacrosanct in this software. It was written by people, implemented by people. We will not import anybody come and implement the software if we do not absolutely have to. So we'll train our local people, we'll train them for free, and we'll put them on the jobs so that they can deliver and get the value. Excellent. As they learn more and more about how to do this, they start to find the gaps of where the software does not work for us, like HR. And so many companies developed HR solutions that plugged in. So I'm not saying that, I mean, I'm certainly, look, we're all on the same page. I'm not saying that we should be very careful that to get to 10,000 people here, there are certain disciplines that whilst all of us on this call might espouse those disciplines, I have to say that when I look outside, right, and Pius has the same experience, we've discussed this many times. When we look outside, those disciplines are not enshrined. That is a cultural issue, maybe bigger than the one Bimbo mentioned, a cultural issue of saying, are we today in Nigeria ready to do the hard work to learn and to make things, to make it straight, when we say straight, perpendicular when it should be, flat is, you know what I'm saying? All these things that we manage, how you can manage anything? Well, you know, what are we talking about here? Where in the world do buildings just collapse overnight? Come on. So the point I'm trying to make here is that we should, and I know nobody's doing that, but we need to emphasize that we are learning and we have to train ourselves to be disciplined in the work we're doing. And, you know, we've all been in this field together. So that's a very, very important point. I don't think we want to lose track of. Now, so yeah, I'm 100% behind you. I think we have to learn, we have to grow, we have to build all these things ourselves, we have to challenge ourselves, but we have to take our people. And Pius knows this. I mean, we talk about developers versus engineers. Pius, you are not the same as the next guy who just came down the road and is now trying to sell some software. And neither is Bimbo. So we all need to take cognizance of the fact that there is a lot of work to be done on human capital to ensure that we are fit to have these 12,000 people in Nigeria. I mean, the reason we're talking about NITEL's campus was I wanted to turn that place into a campus of engineers, right? With a gentleman called Jorn Lissigan of MEST, who was spending his own money to create entrepreneurs in software and build a campus in Accra, where people were willing to go and spend money. The government was willing to support them, not in Nigeria. So again, Inye, with all due respect, I think we have everything it takes. Everything it takes. Actually, there's nothing you're looking for that is not here. There's enough money, right?
Yes.
There are enough people.
Yes.
But we need to really pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, right, and do the necessary.
Thank you. Thank you, Folabi. Now, Bimbo, you're going to speak again. I'll give you time. But there's a question that's been on the chat box for a long time. We need to look at it while the panelists also think of their concluding comments. Anyone can answer. How can the government improve on the enforcement of IP laws as well as retention of IP in Nigeria, particularly addressing the influx of foreign capital that usually takes over the ownership of our IPs? I don't know if you understand this and if you want to have a go at it. I'm drawn more to Folabi as a private equity fund manager because the funds you have are not really all local.
No. So let me use our own companies as example. So for example, we all know InterSwitch. So InterSwitch is a very large payment service infrastructure provider. It was really created 20 years ago or something like that by the banks, not the banks themselves, but the entrepreneurs went to the banks and said, we envisage this kind of connectivity, we can build it, but we need all of you to subscribe to it. Wonderful idea. Thankfully, the banks bought into it. They actually all became subscribers to the organization. The organization built the infrastructure and started to supply services to the banks. That infrastructure didn't have to be built from scratch. They used a software called Postilion to run the switch and maybe the ATMs and so on and so forth. And over time, they added a lot of functionality to that until such a time as now, there's the Postilion core, but Postilion itself don't recognize the software, the system that InterSwitch is running. Now, investors in InterSwitch, the Central Bank of Nigeria insisted that banks could no longer have equity in such companies and forced the divestment of those assets into the hands of private owners. No Nigerian entity stepped up to buy. No Nigerian individual. The only Nigerian company based in Nigeria here that was involved was our firm at Libo Capital, right? And the money we have in our fund comes from 3 international DFIs and a private capital provider in South Africa, a family office in Hong Kong, and Africa Re.
Wow.
No Nigerians. The only Nigerians were ourselves. In fact, the core of this is that the 2 Nigerian entities that were, let's say, anchor investors in Libo Capital, they ran away in 2008 at the beginning of the global financial crisis. I'm happy to say that has changed. So things have changed now. There are more and more Nigerians beginning to have their own capital and put it in there. There are entrepreneurs who have made some money and are going in there. And so I'll say that the cycle is beginning to change, but slowly. So the question is, how do we catalyze? How do we bring more people in? And we've talked about that a little bit. We can say that you need to give people tax breaks. You need to incentivize individuals who are working at their jobs, have excess capital, and say, well, if you take your excess capital, instead of putting in a bank and earning 2% or trying to buy Nigerian brewery shares, well, if you put it into a fund or into a startup entity or into a business angel network and you invest in these new companies, we will give you a tax break equal to the amount of money you invest there. We'll start to see going in there. So there are many ways to do it. That is one way that targets individuals on a tax level, but there are other ways that you can do it in an institutional manner. There's a Bank of Business in the United Kingdom, which deliberately funds startups. There's Silicon Valley Bank, which deliberately provides services and financing targeted at the risks that startups will face. And these companies do very well. There's nothing stopping us from doing such things in Nigeria. But if we do not provide that environment, we will not see private capital coming into the business because we can't take the risk. I'm going to say one more thing about that. We have to realize that VC, venture capital, in its very name and the way it started off, venture capital takes risks on new technologies. So there's a company called Fairchild. You know, Fairchild Semiconductors was the first semiconductor company, one of the big ones. And out of Fairchild, there was a company, this guy's called the Fairchild 8, who went out to form Intel Capital, or Intel, the semiconductor company, because they had a new idea and they could not implement it within Fairchild. They were funded by a venture capital firm who took a risk. But that risk paid up tremendously, right? But the point is, somebody is going to take a risk, and in the United States, in other countries, they are taking risk with capital that they can lose. Again, sometimes I tell people when they talk to a fund manager, I say, well, I want to give you my money. Can you guarantee me a return? I'm like, well, I can't guarantee you a return. There's no way. This is R&D, it's new stuff. We will do the best we can. But to guarantee a return, again, what you can do is to do what Paul was talking about, what Bimbola alluded to, what you call procurement-based innovation. So somebody guarantees that they will buy the outcome of this thing if it is successful. I have to say that we have been, personally, I've been in a fight to get procurement of our NASA-designed ventilator that we are building and making in Nigeria, and we are unable to get the government to say, we will buy 10 of these things if you meet the standards. They can't, they won't say it. And therefore, nobody is going to back that thing unless you go and find your own money to do it. And I think until we break that cycle of people not taking a risk, even a calculated risk, we will have a very great difficulty.
Thank you, Folabi. And the person who asked this question is Yakubu. Yakubu Musa works for NITDA. He actually heads the innovation subsidiary of NITDA. So I don't know if the question is answered, but Musa, if you can hear me, part of what I hear Folabi say is you can get the funnel of funds coming from even private people and government organizations, but more from private if you have tax incentive. You can have high net worth individuals putting their funds into these kinds of startups and ventures if they know that they can benefit, get tax rebates, for instance. So if NIDA wants to take this up and propose tax incentives for institutions, for private sector companies willing to fund R&D, right, as FIRS already knows, but also willing to invest in startups, that might be a way to go. It might help set up an angel investor network in cities, populate them, right, or let their numbers grow. It can also help more VCs emerge from Nigeria, getting funds from Nigerians to seed into businesses that are Nigerian. But I don't know if you can hear me, Yakubu. I think you're still on the call, but we have to move on now. We need to begin to wind up this discussion. We've had an interesting time. I believe we will let the Bimbo wanted to speak one more time. I'll give you 2 minutes maximum, Bimbo, if you're still on the call. Bimbo, could you turn on your mic if you can hear me?
Okay, yes, I broke out a little while.
Okay, you have 2 minutes for your last intervention.
Okay, well, the bottom line, I very much appreciate what Falabi was saying, but I want to also let him know that we have capacity to do those things that he was talking about in Nigeria. We are underestimating our capability, and that is one of the things that is keeping us in the dark. Today, we have ERP that has competed with the brand he was talking about.
Could you raise your volume, increase your volume a bit? We can't hear you clearly.
Is it better?
Slightly.
All right. So I said that while I appreciate what Afolabi was saying, that we also need to know that we are extremely underestimating our capability as Nigerians and as Africans. Today, as an organization, Fintrack Software, we have an ERP that has replaced the brand he was talking about in so many environments. And if, as a country, we latch on that, the kind of growing it to platform level will be a very, very short journey. But for as long as we continue to piggyback what we so-called foreign giants, we will never be giants ourselves. Okay, so that's one thing. That there is and there's an organization in the public sector that have invested close to about 100 billion on ERP over like 6 years. It has not delivered value. Can you imagine that being spent on a Nigerian organization, the number of people that organization will employ? So these are the things that we need to refocus on. NOTAP needs to do more. We have submitted as ISPON. We have submitted list of database of companies and IP products that we have in the country. We've submitted that to NOTAP. We've submitted that to NITDA. So claiming ignorance is no longer an option. We have capability in Nigeria. In the banking system today, we have a product called Credit Risk 360. It's automate credit end-to-end for mega banks. We have replaced so many foreign giants that used to be there. So if government come to the, but we still compete, and people, because they want to go and do training abroad, and so sometimes it goes into the decision process. So this is regulatory environment that government need to come into the play. We have approached ISPON, Bank of Industry. Bank of Industry says, as of now,
they do not see software industry as an industry, that they don't have a framework to deal with the peculiarities of that sector. But we told them, see, the way that you are able to do something for the extractive industry, the Nollywood and what have you, just come up with something to support Software Nigeria. They have been working on that. We have been following them up. They have not get there. They have not gotten there. So,
Sorry, Bimbo, we lost you. But if you can hear me,
as applications are concerned, hello.
Yeah, we'll hear you now.
That as far as applications
conclude.
are concerned,
yes,
we must patronize. We must look inward to deal with our application issues. For now, we can say, okay, for platforms, okay, let's say continue to using their databases and what have you. But for applications, we have capacity. And until we leverage those capacity, it will.
Oh dear.
So that's it. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Bimbo. You were coming off and on, but we heard the essence of your intervention. But please do look at the chat box. Falabi has a fitting response. He's made some clarifications. He thinks that we should separate wrong procurement from the real issues. I also know that he believes that Nigerians have capacity, but he's saying that even that capacity can be further developed by learning from those who've been advanced already. So I also would make bold to say that you probably have built your capacity on the database of these multinationals. So you are excellent in application. So that's how learning is. I was canvassing for being part of the value chain and not saying it's an exclusivist kind of program Nigeria has. No, we are part of the value chain that is international. That's the approach. But thank you so much for your own clarifications. But do look at the chat box. It has responses to your comments. Now, we truly must begin to wind this up. We've spent much more time than we planned. I really want to thank NECA, especially for sparing the time to come and making the
I want to
intervention.
say something about de-risking the innovation space, and I don't think we've said something on that.
I love that.
A lot of the financial organizations, even the DFIs, a lot of the local financial organizations still don't understand the innovation space, as Bimbo just said. And I think there's a huge opportunity for us to have that sit down to find a way to de-risk their investment, because we need to unlock that capital, right?
Absolutely.
Again, the chasm of comprehension or communication needs to be broken down so that we know how we can move forward. A particular DFI has been mentioned here. They really currently don't have a framework for tech and innovation-based businesses that are not collateralized. So that's a huge opportunity for us. It's a challenge, but let's look at it more like an opportunity, as something that we can address, and if addressed, we can unlock funding opportunities to be able to grow our innovation as well as our IP. Thank you.
Thank you. Would I take that as your concluding comment? Because this is an excellent point.
Yes, please. I think we're over time already. Thank you.
Fantastic. So and please do send your details of your contributions in some form. We insist that we must make a presentation to government, NEDA or NOTAP or Ministry of Communication and Digital Economy, or whoever else we need to speak to. AFICTA will take this further. So your document turned into the Secretariat will be very helpful. And see if you can make recommendations specific like we just made now. It will be helpful to AFICTA. So let's then move to Pius for your concluding comments before I get to Falabi and then finally to the host chairman from AFICTA. Pius.
Yeah, thank you very much. So much has been said here today. What is very obvious from what has been discussed today means that there is a lot more to be discussed via AFICTA down the line. There's a legal issue that needs to be discussed. We need to work content with that. There's a who like according to Falabi, who becomes the conductor in managing the funds that would need to be disseminated within the ecosystem, the startup ecosystems. There's one issue that I wanted to just touch on very, very quickly. The issue of capacity that Bimbo brought up. The capacity issue varies from sector to sector. If you go to the oil and gas sector, what you hear is no capacity. If you go to some other sectors, they may say that there is capacity, but we cannot find the people who can deliver on that particular service. So this capacity issue would need to be looked into also, either through AFICTA or through any other workshop that you're going to have to allow us at least judge on that and disseminate the information that we have on it. And I'm coming from it from the the local content side of things. So yes, sometimes it is thrown in our faces that we don't have capacity. But when you drill down, you find one or two, maybe not 6 or 10, but maybe 1 or 2 organizations that do have the capacity to deliver. But for some procurement office departments, they have to have a minimum of 3 in some cases. So anyway, let me not go on and on because there's so much to talk about. But thank you very much. I really appreciate having been. I really appreciate having been a part of all of this. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you too. Thank you so much. And please, on your screen is a quick poll. I like all participants and even the panelists to complete so that AFICTA will have a good stock of what's happened today. And I didn't want to ask Falabi to have a closing comment because I'm high-handed sometimes when I'm a moderator. So I don't want you to respond to Bimbo. But you've made very excellent points. And their last point was actually a good rounding off of issues where you were recommending some things very specifically. We will give a minute or two to do that quick poll. And I hope, Falabi, you're okay with that, with my last comment, I'm not giving you a chance to respond again. Please do that poll before we close. Oh, Falabi's turned his mic on. What do you want to say, sir?
I want to say thank you, Inye. I appreciate and I accept to be coordinated and orchestrated by your conducting.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. We've really gone beyond the time. We've done almost 2.5 hours at a very short, supposedly short webinar. So the poll is up. If you complete it, and just send, and we'll be happy to receive it. So once again, I really would like to thank you all, the 3 of you especially, for yesterday, for the prepping, and today for coming in on time and holding the audience. And I hope that the government persons on the call have learned a thing or two. We will take this further at some point. We will drill down. There's so much to talk about. But today has been a seminal webinar, as it were. So we'll do much more as we proceed. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. But before you turn off and leave the call, we need to have closing comments. Tabo is put his, he was on. Yeah, that's right. The chair of AFICTA.
Thank you, much appreciated, Mr. Kemabonda.
Yes, sir.
And I would like to also appreciate all the panelists for making the time and also sharing their wisdom with everyone in this particular call. And I think there is a very big and a strong conviction with regards to us being in a creative mode, to be creators, builders, and also to actually learn by doing more than using words. IP does not only stop with words. What is very critical in the points that I heard coming across. There is, however, things that I got that must come from the government in terms of ensuring that litigation processes in cases where there is issues, they are addressed. But without much ado, I also would like to invite everyone to fill out the poll, and also there is a link to AFICTA's website, and for you, if you want to be a member, you can also speak to our secretary. Much appreciated. Have a good day further. Highly appreciated, Mr. Inye Kemabonda. Thank you.
Thank you. And on my part, I would like to say that I've enjoyed every moment of facilitating this program. It's been a wonderful day. And I'd like to say goodbye and have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, certainly. Goodbye, Falabi.